So welcome to the SilmFilm panel. This, of course, is a particularly fun panel for me, as the last time we had a Mythmoot is when I sort of revealed my surprise plan to start this thing, the SilmFilm project. And it was a surprise mostly because I had just thought of it. To briefly recap, because Riddles in the Dark was finishing, and and we're looking for sort of the next fun thing to do. And just to recap for a moment, one of the things that I was saying in the talk that I gave when I introduced the SilmFilm project is something that a way in which. And it certainly has been very heavily reinforced over the course of these last 2 years as we've been actually doing this, is a sort of recantation I gave during that talk, recantation of the kind of disdain with which, in which I had joined, and with which all academics are conditioned to speak about fan fiction. Right? Fan fiction is this sort of laughable, even absurd thing that some non-critical and simple-minded people do, right? And nobody, who is intellectually rigorous takes it seriously, right? It's this sort of puerile activity that eventually some people grow out of. That's the normal thing, right? That's the way academics think about and talk about fan fiction. And the thing that the process that had kind of developed for me was the recognition over years and years of the wonderful opportunity to teach more and more Tolkien and more elements of Tolkien than I had ever taught before. During our first few years at Mythgard and Signum, was the recognition that almost everything Tolkien wrote was fan fiction. I mean, some of the really overt kind, like Sigurd and Gudrun as Old Norse fan fiction, right? Hey, let me see if I can do that meter and retell these stories. And I mean, the way that, in fact, the whole way in which his scholarship and his creative life were together, which you can see everywhere, not just in his actual scholarship, of course, where you can see again and again his creative sensitivity being engaged. And he's not just talking about things. He is imaginatively investing them with a kind of life, but of course throughout his fictional works, which are, almost as, an argument which Tom Shippey has made many times, almost all of the things that he thought about Anglo-Saxon and the Anglo-Saxon culture that he never published, right? He put into Rohan, basically. I mean, instead of publishing it, he just did it. And whether it be his particular interpretation of contested lines in Beowulf, right, or whether it be his theory about what some ideas that are discussed but nobody really understands what those words mean or what they're talking about, and he just the Rohirrim do it, right? So instead he just kind of embodied. Anyway, as I began to sort of see and appreciate that more and more, the significance of the combination of critical and creative activity, that is the kind of imaginative investment in a secondary world, which is normally classified and generally with disdain as fan fiction, just was something that became more and more interesting to me, and that I could sort of see and see the value of more and more. So that's why I wanted to return to the Silmarillion, which I hadn't really done much with since the Silmarillion seminar back in 2010. And I still felt the same desire that led me to start the Silmarillion seminar in the first place, which is the Silmarillion, even though it is admired by very many, it's still often distant to even to people who read it. It's there are many people. I know in this room it is very generally not true, but for very many Tolkien readers, the Silmarillion, even if they can get through it, is really hard to get into, hard to attach yourself to in the same way. And so the goal of the project was, I have an idea for how we can approach the Silmarillion and engage with it imaginatively in a really new and deeper way. And this is, of course, also fueled by my very great frustration with the disappointing failure of Peter Jackson's Hobbit films. And we were like, okay, and everyone, of course, right after the Hobbit films was calling for, him to like do the Silmarillion, and I'm like, no, let's not do that. And then thank God you can't. But it's like, but we could. And so we began to, and the process of thinking through what a theoretical adaptation of the Silmarillion would look like, and to go through and plan it on every different level and say, let's really invest ourselves imaginatively in occupying the space of this story and really coming to understand it. And that whole combination of very close reading and the same kind of imaginative investment in filling in the corners and trying to understand what is outside the often quite bare frame of the narrative that Tolkien gives. How can we make sense of this? How can we make this story work in more than the bare, epitome, the word Christopher Tolkien uses to describe it. The bare kind of outline that it often is. Anyway, so this is where the project began. Marie's here, so I'll stop stalling. Marie and Nick have been two of the leaders of the. So I started it off, and the goal, the hope was that lots of listeners and people would jump in, because I don't know how to do half of what we're talking about. I could talk about the story, but the idea was that we would build a community of people who would all be participating imaginatively in this process. And Nick and Marie have been our two leaders of the folks who have really committed themselves to the project and really. They look surprised that I've used the word committed.
Not surprised.
That's how I think of it anyway. But anyhow, the way that they have invested better themselves in this. Anyway, it's been really wonderful. So they're here to talk about some of the things that they've been doing, and sort of talk about the project and what we've now done. The overall form of it, of course, we've planned it not as a feature film, because that's an incredibly dumb way to do the Silmarillion. We've planned it as like a continuous TV series. We've planned season 1 and season 2 so far in the last 2 years. Chronologically, season 1 went from the Ainulindale through the chaining of Melkor. And season 2 has gone from Cuivianen and the Awakening of the Elves through the Darkening of Valinor. Was the climactic episode 13 of season 2. So that's the ground that we've covered and the stuff that we've done, and they're going to come and talk some more about things that we've done and stuff that we've learned along the way.